Cherokee National. It's round 5 of the National Enduro Series. It's out in Greensboro, Georgia. About an hour east of Atlanta.
11:15, 11:20, something like that.
Super cool trail out here today.
All right, time to cry.
You see, one of the kids is pumped, doesn't want to get off the motorcycle. The other one, she's sitting in the stroller there, couldn't care less. This is lame. So I drew row 19 along with my buddy Jeff, and we have Corey Steed in the pro women's class also on the line with us. In case you're wondering and you think, oh, Rick, you might be able to keep up with the pro women, maybe it'd be a good little carrot for you. No, the top pro women beat the majority of the AA men, so I will not be keeping up with them, thank you. I'll just start with them and watch her right away. Conditions for this race were, as you can see, kind of dusty to start out with. This section of trail and a lot of the trail was actually pretty hard packed with some dust over top, so if you were somewhat close to a rider in front of you, they were laying some dust down and it got a little difficult to see. Sometimes it's hard to pick up on the GoPro, but this whole section, until she gets a good gap on you, was pretty difficult to make out the ground, see where the ruts were or not. But there were a few sections in the woods of new trail that had this cool, like, dry loam that I'd call it, set up real well, made for some great traction. Overall, the start of the race, the first couple sections were pretty good conditions. Now, later on in the race, we had a pretty good thunderstorm roll through. In fact, we had a little rain, I think starting test 2 for us, and it just messed with our vision, but didn't really lay down a whole lot of water on the course. But then test 4 and 5, we had a full-on monsoon coming down. It got pretty challenging. So, in fact, test 1 was the only one where I kept my goggles on the whole time, and they got fogged up enough where I maybe could have used to take them off by the end of that test as well. See, we're going through one of the sections of brand new trail here, and this was still hard packed, but it was kind of like a dry loam, whereas when we come out here to the open sections that were a little bit more burned in, those had a pretty firm base and it was pretty slippery, so you couldn't really push it super hard in those corners, but it wasn't as bad as, say, like a super slick wet clay. Yeah, overall, all the test sections, I really enjoyed it. You could tell the course designers and the guys that laid everything out did a great job. As much as some people don't like the word, I thought the course had a pretty good flow for the most part, until test 4 and 5 when it started raining and there's no flow anywhere except for flowing rivers down the trail. So a little ways into this test, the test 1 here, maybe 10-12 minutes into the test, I started to have a little bit of an issue with fogging my goggles. It wasn't raining or anything yet, I was just getting fog, and I would try pulling some tear-offs. That didn't do anything, and in hindsight I should have really pulled my goggles because I didn't realize how bad the fog was getting. I think right now, at this point, this fog is still not too bad, but not too far from now it starts to get bad, and at one point it actually makes me go off course because you can't see, end up pitching into a tree and all that good stuff. somewhere halfway through test 1, something like that, they had a split option with you could go left to go around a log or go straight to go straight over it. And I'm a little timid on logs. A couple years ago I had an incident where it messed up my wrist and hand by taking a tumble over one of these guys, so I tend to check up and be a little timid over those, but I'll at least still go over it. That one wasn't too bad. I probably should have hit it a little faster and not slowed down so much like a sissy. Did I mention the fun flowy trail? Yeah, this part was awesome. I think by this point I was starting to get affected by the fog. I was just starting to creep into my vision a little bit, and I started pulling tear-offs to see if that would help, and no luck there. Fog doesn't go away when you pull a tear-off. So I think by this point the fog was really starting to affect me, where I couldn't see down the trail, couldn't make out the the ruts and bumps and things like that. So I could see the general direction of the trail, so I wasn't really going off course all that much, but it was just trying to make out any nuances on the ground, which way the wheel was going to get yanked, when I should get my weight back. None of that was really happening, and it actually did affect me pretty good. In one of these sections here, I was going down a hill and thought I could jump over this root where I was not even close, and it ended up jerking the bike pretty good into a tree here. So that sort of like halfway knocked the wind out of me, and yeah, took a little bit of the wind out of my sails. So, and it was kind of funny because it just came right into this I'll call it like slightly technical section. Just had a bunch of fun, like kind of roller coastery up and downs, and they would have been difficult enough to maintain speed through just normal, but I kind of trying to catch my breath from just knocking it out there and trying to push the bike over these rollers, and it wasn't happening. So I was kind of putt-putting for a little bit. So that's Rachel Gudish catching me from a minute down and going by me as we still continue to go through some of these fun little roller coaster up and downs. Again, I'm still trying to catch my breath, so at least her going through it's giving me an indicator of what I've got coming so I can get ready for it. So you can see by this point the rain started to come down, and we had this interesting mix of dust coming off the trail and rain falling on our goggles. So what was happening was the raindrops would collect all the dust that was already sitting on the goggles and make these kind of like these dark splotches like you can see on the GoPro lens. The funny thing is it also affects the GoPro's image stabilization, so the horizon leveling feature started to get a little wonky and hold the view sideways because it was trying to focus on the dots rather than the horizon. So kind of an interesting little quirk of the program. Another interesting thing that happened to me on test 1 was my Camelback hose came out of the little place where I tuck it into. I usually just keep it tucked away, and I only drink in between tests. And it had fallen out and was dangling behind me, and it was, from doing that, it was getting caught up like between the fender and the side panel and the muffler, and it would hang me up to where I couldn't really stand up and kind of get hung up. A couple times I got down on a back wheel and it ripped a bite valve off, so I ended up losing all the water out of my Camelback. That was kind of a bummer. So what I was doing was putting it in my mouth and just had to hold the thing in my mouth the entire time, and every once in a while I'd drop it out of my mouth and have to reach down and put it back in. So that's test 1 done and dusted, quite literally. And at this point I think we may have been getting a little bit of rain, and my goggles are all foggy and everything, so come and talk to my dad there. My dad's the pit crew.
Cars right here. Clear goggles. Do you have ones with tear-offs?
Not yet, no.
Okay.
Cars right there.
No, I'll just keep these. All right. So.
You all right?
Yeah, this thing came off and like was stuck a few times.
Anything I can do?
No, not really. All right, I'll be back in just a second.
So I just decided to roll on to the start of test 2 and just do what I could to dry the goggles off. I still had a couple tear-offs on, so see if that would work out. Now, something funny happened here. You see that number 18 on the board there? When that's the number of minutes past the start key time, and we're row 19. So when that changes to 19, that's like saying go. So the instance here, when this turned to 19, Corey should have gone, and basically everybody should go when it says 19. Obviously, no one's paying attention here.
Go, go, go!
So we all end up with a whatever, like a 2-second penalty because we weren't paying attention. So whatever, we got rolling. I don't think any of us lost by 2 seconds, so it was all okay. Now at this point it was raining. It either was actively raining or the rain was still falling off the leaves in the trees, so the goggles were getting pretty wet almost immediately, and we were having fog issues as well, just from the word go. It's just so humid out and a little bit warm, and when you're working hard it's kind of hard to avoid. I had turned the foam out of the bottom of my goggles, but it wasn't really helping. It was just not getting enough airflow to move that humidity out. So while the raindrops falling on your goggles, you could see that it got bad real quick, and you could either wipe them off, reach up with your glove and wipe them off, or pull a tear off if the water hadn't gotten behind the tear offs on the goggle ends. But the fog was more like the proverbial frog in the boiling pot of water, where the fog got worse slowly. So by the time I realized how bad it was and took my goggles off, I really should have taken them off a few minutes before. So vision here is getting worse and worse. Looking back on it, I only wish I could see as well as what the GoPro's seeing right now, but it was getting pretty bad. Like, I just pointlessly took an off-trail excursion, didn't really realize where I was going, and I think pretty soon here I realized how bad it's getting and just go ahead and pull the goggles. So after struggling through, trying to see through the fog and just kind of tiptoeing around because I can't see anything, at some point I turn around, see my buddy Jeff's about to catch me, and my ego simply can't handle that. So off come the goggles, and then as soon as I did, I realized, oh wow, this is way better, and I could speed up almost instantly. So I dropped Jeff again. I'm sure he loves that. Kind of interesting, even though we had gotten some pretty good rain by this point. A lot of this trail was actually still in pretty good shape. There's a few of these corners where there was no dust or dirt over top to tack up, and it was just like slick clay ice. But a lot of the corners, I'd say maybe maybe 75% of the corners had some pretty good traction, and you could usually see, not right there, but usually see when you were going to come into the corners that didn't have traction. So you just had to be, obviously cautious on the front brake, and you couldn't lean it too hard. But a lot of this dirt was still actually had some pretty good grip to it if you could just find the spots that didn't have grip. Also, at some point during this test, it dawned on me that my GoPro mounted on my chest protector had been popped by my handlebars or my bar pad a couple times and was now pointed in a direction that wasn't really ideal, so I was able to reach up and reposition, and that did seem to help things. So I need to figure out a way to mount it so that doesn't happen. Again, there's Rachel going by me. I think Rachel ended up second, and I think the top 3 women were separated by less than a minute. I think they were all on 108 minutes for their total test times for all 5 tests. That's pretty close finish for almost an hour and 50 minutes of racing to all be on 1 minute. That was pretty cool. So I had packed extra GoPro batteries so I could switch them out at the fuel stops in between some of the tests, but what ended up happening with the rain and fog and the conditions, it ended up being kind of a panic to put together the goggle situation and trying to fix my hydration pack situation, and I completely forgot to switch the battery. So fortunately we'll only get tests 1 and 2 before the battery dies. So yeah, by this point there's no denying it. It's getting pretty slippery and you really got to watch out on that off-camber stuff. Some of these sections did actually still have some okay traction, but a lot of this, like right here, you really had to watch it, because if you laid it over, got on the gas too hard, the wheels were coming out from under you real quick. So overall, I was pretty happy with my result and my riding on the day. I ended up 4th in 40A, which is a really good result for me. I got to kind of take it with a grain of salt because the weather forecast did scare some guys away, so my 4th place was a little bit bolstered by some people not showing up. But my gaps behind the winners, like my time gaps behind the winners, were a lot better than they have been in some of the previous nationals, and so I was really happy with it overall and something to build on for the rest of the season.
Right there. Beginning of the next test is right there.
So yeah, overall, an awesome event, well run. These national enduros, they always are. The club that marked the trail and laid everything out, they did a great job, man. This was an awesome course. Obviously a little bit of a bummer with the weather and the associated vision issues that I think everybody was having. But, you know, no one can control that, and that's just what happens. And the rain came down on that day. It actually came down so hard that they canceled Test 6 for everybody. So even us A riders only did 5 tests on the day, and I was honestly kind of happy to hear that when we got told that Test 6 was canceled. So, yeah, on to the next national.
Well, that wasn't so bad. The court conditions, at least.
27. We got 20 minutes.